Hi, welcome to Zoe and Friends. Today we are reading, Drumroll please. The Secret Garden. Yay! Read the book, see the movie. But what I think is that the older ones are better. So, how many pages? 358. Probably more than one only Bob. But still, I can do it! Okay, The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Illustrated by Tasha Tudor. The Secret Garden. There's no one left. Chapter 1. The only picture you'll see of this. By the way, I'm reading 3 chapters. All the way to whatever her name was.
Do you want to read the back?
I want to read. Oh, it's almost as long as the pages. Okay, when orphaned Mary Lennox comes to live at her uncle's great house on Yorkshire moors, she finds it full of mysterious secrets. There are nearly 100 rooms, most of which are locked. The house is built of creepy old portraits and suits of armor. Mary rarely sees her uncle, and perhaps most unsettling of all is night, and she hears the sound of someone crying on the long corridors. The gardens surrounding the odd poetry are Mary's escape as she explores every inch of them, all except a mysterious walk-in locked garden. Then one day, Mary discovers a key. Could it open the door to the garden? Dun, dun, dun! Da-da. Okay, like I was gonna do, I am gonna read the chapter. No one's gonna stop me now. And exactly something did. The table of contents. Okay, there's no one left. When Mary Lennox was sent to Misselthwaite Manor to live with her uncle, everybody said she was the most disagreeable-looking child ever seen. It was true, too. She had a little thin face and a little thin body, thin hair with a sour expression. Her hair was yellow, her face was yellow because she had been born in India and had always been ill in one way or another. Her father was held a position under English government and had always been busy and ill himself. And her mother had been a great beauty who cared only to her parties and amused herself with gay people. She had not wanted a little girl at all. When Mary was born, she handed her over to the care of Aunt Ella. Whatever it is. No, thank you. Something A and a Y and an A and an H. Who was made to understand that if she wished to please the Mem Sabbath, she must keep the child out of sight as much as possible. So when she was sickly, fretful, ugly little baby, she was kept out of the way, and she never remembered seeing permanently anything but dark faces of her Allah. Aya and other native servants, and as they were always obeyed her and gave her her own way, and every dispirited by her crying. By the time she was 6 years old, the young English governors who came to teach her how to read and write disliked her so much that she gave up her place in 3 months. And when other governors came to try to fill it, the dust makes me sneeze. Go away, dust. Oh, hi, Kai. And she became closer still. Wait. Where was I? Oh, I lost it. To fill it, they always went to the way in a shorter time than the first one. So, if Mary had not chosen to really want to know how to read books, she would never have learned her letters at all. So, frightfully hot morning, when she was about 9 years old, she awakened feeling very cross, and she became crosser still when she saw that servant who stood beside her bedside was not her. I forgot the word. I don't think it's my level.
Yeah.
I don't think it's my level.
Okay.
Why did you come? She said to the strange woman. I will not let you stay. Send my Aya to me. The woman looked frightened, but she only stammered that the Aya could not come. And when Mary threw herself into passion and beat and kicked her, she only looked more frightened and repeated that it was not possible for the Aya to come to Missy Sabbath. There was something mysterious in the air of the morning. Nothing was done in this regular order, and several of native servants seemed missing, while those whom Mary slunk or hurried about with ashy and scared faces. But no one would tell her anything, and her Aya did not come. She was actually left alone as the morning went on. And at last she wandered out into the garden and began to she was making a flower bed. And she struck a big time, growing and more angry and muttering herself the things that she would say and the names that she would call Sadie when she returned. Pig! Pig! Daughter of Pig! She said. Because to call a native pig is the worst insult of all. She was grinding her teeth and saying this over and over again when she heard her mother come out from the veranda with someone. She was with a fair young man, and they stood walking together in strange low voices. Mary knew the fair young man who looked like a boy. She had heard that he was a very young officer who had just come from England. The child stared at him, but he stared most at her mother. She always did this when she had a chance to see that. Because to Miss Mem Sabbath, Mary used to call her, offenser than anything else was such a tall, slim, pretty person who wore such lovely clothes. Her hair was like a curly silk and had delicate those little nose which seemed to be disnagging things. She had a large, laughing eyes. All her clothes were thin and floating. Mary said they were full of lace. They looked fuller and of lace than they ever did this morning, but her eyes were not laughing at all. They were large and scared, and looked imploring to the fair boy's officer face. Isn't so very bad? Oh, is it? Mary heard her say. Awfully, the young man answered in a trembling voice. Awfully, Miss Lennox, who you ought to have gone the hills 2 weeks ago. The man sat wrung her hands. No, I ought, she cried. I only stayed to go to that silly dinner party. What a fool I was. At that very moment, such a loud sound of wailing broke out from the servants' quarters that she had clutched into the young man's arm, and Mary stood shivering from head to foot. The wailing grew wilder and wilder. What is it? What is it? Miss Lennox gasped. Someone has died, answered the boy officer. You did not say I had broken out among your servants. I did not know, the mammoth Sabbath cried. Come with me, She turned and ran into the house. After that, the plotting things happened, and the mysterious oddness of the morning was explained to Mary. The cholera has broken out into the most fatal, and the people were dying like flies. The ayah had been taken ill in the night, and it was because she had just died that the servants had wailed in huts. Before the next day, 3 other servants were dead, and the others had to run away in terror. They were panic on every side, and dying people in all the bungalows. During the confusion and wilderness of every second day, Mary hid herself in a nursery and was forgotten by everyone. Nobody thought of her. Nobody wanted her, and strange things happened of which she knew nothing. Mary immediately cried and slept through the hours. She only knew that people were ill, and she heard mysterious and frightening sounds. Once she crept into the dining room and found it empty, though partly finished meal was on the table, and chairs placed look at them had been hastily pushed back when the dinner rose. Suddenly, for some reason, the child ate some fruit biscuits. Being thirsty, and she drank a glass of wine of which stood nearly filled. It was sweet, but she did not know how strong it was. Very soon it made her instantly drowsy.
Zoe, an ayah is a native maid or nursemaid employed by Europeans in India.
I'm just going to call it ayah.
Yeah, perfect word.
And she went back to her nursery and shut herself in again, frightened by cries she heard in the huts and hurried sounds of feet. The wine made her so sleepy that she could scarcely keep her eyes open as she lay down on her bed and knew nothing more for a long time. Many things happened during the hours in which she had slept so heavily, but she was not disturbed by the wails and sound of things that had been carried out and about of a bungalow. That's what I call it. When she was awakened, She lay and stared at the wall. The house was perfectly still. She had never known it would be so silent before. She heard neither voices nor footsteps and wondered if everyone had got well of the cholera and all the trouble was over. She wondered also who would take care of her now her ayah was dead. There would be a new ayah, and perhaps she would know some new stories. Mary had rather tried one of the old ones. She did not cry because her nurse had died. She was actionate because her child have never cared much for anyone. The noise and hurried about wailing and cholera had been frightened her. She had seemed angry because no one seemed to remember that she was alive. Everyone was too panicking to think a little girl no one was fond of. When the people had the cholera, it seemed that they remembered nothing but themselves. But if everyone had gone well again, surely someone would have remembered to come back and look for her. No one came. She just laid waiting in the house, seemed to grow more and more silent. She heard something rustling on matter when she looked down and saw a little snake gliding along and watched her with eyes like jewels. She was not frightened because he was a harmless little thing and would not hurt her, and seemed in no hurry to get out of the room. He slipped under the door as he watched him. "How queer and quiet it is," she said. "It sounds as if there were no one in the bungalow but me and the snake." Almost the next minute, she heard footsteps in the compound, and then on the veranda there were men's footsteps, and the men entered the bungalow and talked in a low voices. No one wants to meet or speak to them, as if they seemed to open the doors and lock into rooms.
"What desolation!
What desolation!" she heard one voice say. "That pretty woman. I suppose that the child's you. I heard there was a child, though no one ever saw her." Mary was standing in the middle of the nursery when they opened the door a few minutes later. She looked an ugly, cross little thing, was frowning because she had beginning to be hungry and feel gracefully neglected. The first man who came in, the large officer she had once seen talk to her father. He looked tired and troubled, but when he saw her, he was so startled that he almost jumped back. "Barney!" he cried out. "There is a child here, a child alone in a place like this. Mercy on us, who is she?" "I'm Mary Lennox," the little girl said, drawing herself up stiffly. She thought the man was rude to call her father's bungalow a place like this. I fell asleep when everyone had the cholera, and I have only just waken up. Why does nobody come?" It is a child no one ever saw," explained the man, turning to his companions. She had actually been forgotten. "Why was I forgotten?" Mary said, stamping her foot. "Why does nobody come?" The young man, whose name was Barney, looked at her very sadly. Mary even thought that she saw him wink his eyes, as if to wink tears away. "Poor little kid," he said. "There's no one left to come." It was that strange and sudden way that Mary found out that she had neither had a father nor mother left, that she had died and been carried away in the night, and she had few native servants who had who had not died. Also, that they had been left in the house as quickly as they could to get out of it. None of them even remembered that there was a missy Sabbath, that there was why the place was so quiet. It was true that there was no one in the bungalow but herself and a little wrestling snake. Chapter 2. Mistress Mary, quite contrary.
Mistress Mary, quite contrary. Sounds like a nursery rhyme.
Do you know that nursery rhyme?
Right.
Do you know it?
Mary
had liked to look at her mother from a distance, as though she thought her very pretty. But as she knew a very little, as she could scarcely have been expelled to love her or miss her every much as when she was gone, she did not miss her at all, and an entire though to herself she had always done. If she had been older, she would no doubt have been very anxious at being left alone in the world, but she was very young. She had always been taken care of. She supposed she always would be. What she thought was that she would like to know if it was going to nice people who would be polite to give her own way, her ayah and the other native servants had done. She knew that she was not going to stay at the English cleaverman's house where she was taking care. At first, she did not want to stay. The English clergyman was poor, and he had 5 children nearly the same age, as they were shabby clothes, and they were always clearing and snatching toys from each other. Mary hated the untidy bungalow, and so disagreeable to them that after the first day or two, nobody would play with her. By the second day, they had given her a nickname, which made her furious. It was
Basil.
It was Basil who thought of it first. Basil was a little boy with impudent blue eyes and a turned-up nose, and Mary hated him. He was playing by herself under a tree. She was making heaps of earth, paths of gardens, and Basil stood near to watch her. Presently, he got rather interested and suddenly made a suggestion. "Why don't you just heap the stones and pretend it's a rockery?" he said. There in the middle, he leaned over to the point. "Go away!" cried Mary. "I don't want boys. Go away!" For a moment, Basil looked angry. Then he began to tease. He had always been teasing his sisters. He danced around and around and made her face as he sang and laughed. "Mistress Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? With silver bells and cockle shells and marigolds all in a row." He sang it until the other children heard and laughed too. And the crosser Mary got, the more they sang, "Mistress Mary, quite contrary." And after that, as long as she stayed with them, they called her Mistress Mary, quite contrary, when they spoke of her to each other, and quite when she spoke to her. "You're going to be sent home," Basil said to her, "at the end of the week. We're glad of it." "I'm glad of it too," answered Mary. "Where's home?" "She doesn't know where home is," said Basil, with a 7-year-old groan. "It's England, of course. Our grandma lives there, and our sister Mabel was sent there last year. You are not going to go to your grandma. You have none. You are going to your uncle. His name is Mr.
Archibald
Craven.
Craven.
I don't know anything about him, snapped Mary. I know you don't,
Basil answered.
Basil answered. You don't know anything. Girls never do. Basil. I've heard Father and Mother talking about him. He's a great big dusky old house in the country, and no one goes near him. He's so cross he won't let them in, and they won't come. They won't come if he let them. He's a hunchback. He's horrid. I don't believe you, said Mary as she turned back and struck her fingers in her ears. Because she would not listen anymore. But she thought of her a great deal afterward. And when Miss Garford was told her that night she was going to sail away to England in a few days and go to her uncle, Mr. Archibald
Craven,
who lived at
Misselthwaite Manor.
She looked so snorty and stubbornly
uninterested.
That's they want.
Good job. Go ahead.
They did not try what to think about her. They tried to be kind to her, but she only turned her face away when Miss Crawford attempted to kiss her, and held herself stiffly when Mr. Crawford patted her shoulder. She's such a plain child, Miss Crawford said pitifully afterward. Her mother was such a pretty creature. She had a pretty manner, too. And Mary has the most unattractive way I've ever saw in a child. The children call her Mistress Mary, quite contrary, as though it's naughty of them. No, one can't help understanding it. Perhaps as if their mother had carried her pretty face and pretty manners often to the nursery. Mary might have learned some pretty ways, too. It's very sad now that the poor, beautiful thing is gone, to remember that many people ever knew that she had a child at all. I believe she scarcely looked at her, sighed Miss Crawford. When her eye was dead, there was no one to give her to the little thing. Think of the servants running away and leaving her all alone in that deserted bungalow. Colonel McGrew said he nearly jumped out of his skin when he opened the door, found her standing in the middle of the room. Mary made the long voyage to England under the care of an officer's wife, who was taking her children to leave them in a boarding school. She was very much absorbed in her own little boy and girl, and was rather glad to hand the child over to the woman Mr. Archibald Craven sent to meet her in London. The woman was his housekeeper at Misselthwaite Manor. Her name was Miss Medlock. She was a stout woman, her very red cheeks and sharp black eyes. She wore very purple dresses, black silk mantille with a jet fringe on the back of the bonnet, and purple velvet flowers which shook up and trembled when she moved her head. Mary did not like her at all, but she was very seldom and liked people, and there was nothing remarkable in that. Besides which, it was evident, Miss Medlock did not think much of her. My world, she's a pain in a little piece of goods, she said. And we'd heard her that the mother was a beauty. She hadn't handed much of it down, had she, ma'am? Perhaps she'll improve as she grows older, the officer's wife said good-naturedly. If she were not to swallow, and her nears a nicer expression. Her features are rather good. Children alter so much.
Change.
She'll have She has to alter a good deal, answered Miss Medlock. There are nothing likely to improve her children at Misselthwaite, if you ask me. Hi, Shayla.
And Eva's watching too.
Hi, Eva.
Okay. They thought.
They thought Mary was not listening because she was standing a little apart from them at the window of a private hotel they had gone to. She was watching the passing buses and cabs and people, but she heard quite well and was made very curious about her uncle and the place he lived in. What sort of place is it, and what he would be like? What a hunchback.
What was a hunchback?
What was a hunchback? She had never seen one. Perhaps there were none in India, since she had been living in other people's houses, and queer thoughts which were new to her. She had begun to even wonder when her father and mother had been alive. Like other children seemed belonged their fathers and mothers, but she had never seemed to really be anyone's little girl. She had servants and food and clothes, but no one had taken any notice of her. She did not know that this way because this disagreeable child, but then of course she did not know what was disagreeable. She often thought that other people were, but she did not know what was so herself. She thought Miss Medlock the other disagreeable person she had ever seen, which her common high-colored face of a common fine
bonnet.
When the next day they set out to the journey of Yorkshire, she walked through the station and railway, carried with her head and trying to keep as far away as she could, because she did not want to seem to belong to her. It would have made her angry to think people imagined she was a little girl. But Miss Medlock was not in the least disturbed by her and her thoughts. She was a kind woman who would stand no nonsense from young ones. At least that she would said she would have been asked. She did not want to go to young London just when her sister Maria's daughter was going to be married. But she had a comfortable, well-paid place as housekeeper at Misselthwaite Manor, and the only way she would try to do at once what was Mr. Archibald Craven told her to. She never dared to even ask a question. Captain Lennox and his wife died of the cholera Mr. Craven said after a short, cold way. Captain Lennox was my wife's brother, and I'm the daughter's guardian. The child is to be brought here. You must go to London and bring her yourself. So she packed her small trunk and made the journey. Mary sat in her corner, railway and carriage, and looked
Plain and fretful.
She had nothing to read or to look at. She had folded her thin little black gloves in her hands in her lap. Her black dress made her look yellower than ever, and her limp light hair strangled from under her black crepe hat. A more marred-looking young one I've ever saw in my life, said Miss Medlock thought. Married is a Yorkshire word who sat so still without doing anything, and at last she got tired of watching her and began to talk in a brisk, hard voice. I suppose I may as well tell you something about you are going to do, she said. Do you know anything about your uncle? No, said Mary. Never heard of your father or mother talk about him? No, said Mary, frowning. She frowned because she remembered her father and mother, and they talked to her about anything in particular. Certainly they never told her things. Muttered Miss Medlock, staring at her queer, unresponsible little face. She did not say any more for a few moments. Then she had began again. I suppose you might as well be told something to prepare you. You are not going to a queer place. Mary said nothing at all, and Miss Medlock looked rather discomfited by her apparent indifference. But after her taking a breath, she went on. Not but she was a big place. It was in a gloomy way, and Mr. Craven wrought of it in his way, and that's gloomy enough though, too. The house is 600 years old, and it's on top of the edge of a moor, and there's near 100 rooms in it, though most of them is shut and locked. There is pictures of fine furniture and been there for ages. Big bark round of its gardens and trees and branches, and trailing around of some of them. She paused and took another breath. But there's nothing else, she ended suddenly. Mary had begun to listen, despite herself. It all sounded so unlike India, and anything new rather attracted her. But she did not intend to look as if they were interested. That was one of her unhappy, disagreeable ways. So she sat still. Well, said Miss Medlock, what do you think of it? Nothing, she answered. I don't know anything about such places. That made Miss Medlock laugh in a sort of a laugh. She said, but you're like an old woman. Don't you care? Doesn't matter, said Mary, whether I care or not. Doesn't want you to keep the Misselthwaite Manor, for I don't know, unless it's because it eats this way. He's not going to trouble himself about you. That's certain. He never troubles himself about no one. She stopped herself as if she just remembered something in time. He's got a crooked back, she said. That set him wrong. He's a sour young man and got no good at all of his money in a big place until he was married. Mary's eyes had turned toward her spite of intention back not to seem to care. She had never thought of a hunched backs being married as of a tripled surprise. Miss Benlock saw this, but she has talked with woman continued with more interest. This way she was passing some time of it, and at any rate she was a sweet pretty thing. She had ever walked in this world, and a bad blade of glass she wanted. Nobody thought she'd marry him, but she did. The people said she married him for his money, but she didn't. She didn't. Possibly when she died. Mary gave the instantly jump. Oh, she died? Oh, did she die? She explained, quite without meaning to. She had just remembered her French fairy story, with once have called her
Wicked a la hoop.
Wicked a la hoop. It had been about a poor hunchback and a beautiful princess that made her suddenly sorry for Mr. Archibald Craven. Yes, she died, Miss Medlock answered, and it made him queer than ever. He cares about nobody. He won't see people. Most of the time he goes away. And when he's at Misselthwaite, he shuts himself up in a west wing and won't let anyone but the picture to see him. Picture's an old fellow, but he took good care of him when he was a child, and he knows his ways. It sounds like something in a book, and it did not make Mary feel cheerful. A house with 100 rooms, and he shut with the doors locked. A house on the edge of a manor. Whatever a manor? Sounds like dreary. A man with a crooked back who shut himself up also. She started out the window with her lips and pitched together, and it seemed quite natural that the rain had begun to pour down in a gray slants line, splash and stream around the window panes. If the pretty wife had been alive, she might have made things cheerfully by something by her own mother, and running in with going to the parties and found on the rocks full of lace. Bet you did not there anymore. You needn't expect to see him, because 10 is one of you won't, said Miss Medlock. And you mustn't expect that there would be people to talk to you. You will have to play about and look after yourself. You'll be told what the rooms and what into the rooms you'll keep out of. There are gardens enough. And when you're in the house, you don't go wandering and poking out. Mr. Cravens won't have it. I shall not want to go poking out, said a sour little Mary, that such suddenly had begun to be rather sorry for Mr. Archibald Craven. She had been to tease to be sorry, and to think that he was unpleasant enough to deserve all that had happened to him. And she turned her face toward and screaming panes of the window and railway, and gazed at the gray storm, at which she looked out forever and ever. She watched as its long as steadily gray needs and grew heavier and heavier before the eyes fell asleep.
What do you think is in that picture?
You're talking.
Those were two sad chapters.
They're so long.
Mm-hmm. I know you're not used to so many small letters and following them. New reading adventure.
Seriously, what level is that?
We actually don't know. It doesn't say it anywhere. It's an old book. It was written in 1909, I think.
Yes, you said that yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, bye-bye.